Chelsea are performing like a mid-table club at the moment, and it's something that really needs to be rectified after yesterday's late defeat at home to Sunderland. This is my review, my reaction, thoughts, feelings, everything in between after yesterday's game at the Bridge. Apologies that it is coming a little bit later than I would have hoped to have made this show. When you get a defeat like that, you just kind of want to get it out of the way. So apologies, it is on the Sunday. Nightmare getting out of London yesterday, just traffic, and it just kind of compounded the misery, soaking in it really after the late loss to Sunderland. Sometimes when you have a little bit of time to reflect on a game, whether it's been a win or especially a loss, sometimes, maybe your feeling about it, changes a little bit, evolves a little bit with the distance of time. And maybe it's better, especially when you're doing a podcast, that you aren't overreacting. My feeling on yesterday hasn't really changed, and I don't really know how else you shake up what happened yesterday other than the headline. It's a terrible result by Chelsea, and it's also a terrible performance. I think it's a performance that is really a warning sign that not a lot has changed or not a lot has gone forward in terms of Chelsea's ability to deal with these type of games in a really effective and convincing manner. And it's also a continuation of the concerns I've had about Chelsea's general level of performance so far this season. With the exception of Liverpool and the emphatic way we beat West Ham, and you can pick out individual periods in games where Chelsea have clicked. But in terms of resounding, overwhelming feeling that our performances are consistently convincing, I don't think you can make an argument that Chelsea are anywhere close to doing that so far this season. And that is my concern. I think our general level of performance is simply not good enough to even get us in the top 5, let alone even getting to a place where I would prefer us to be, safely in the top 4, starting to look like a team that in the future can challenge for a Premier League title. We are way off that. And there are many reasons why people will pick at that. Injuries this season, the Club World Cup fatigue. But I just want to say about the Club World Cup fatigue, I'm not dismissing it, that it will play a part this season. I think we all kind of knew. It was kind of the extent of how much it would play a part in Chelsea's decline or kind of fatigue and level of performance and energy over the course of a long season. I'm not saying it has no bearing. My confusion is, how do we analyse Chelsea? Because every time we win a game, isn't that also a part of the Club World Cup fatigue? Like, why doesn't the Club World Cup fatigue impact every single game? And also, it kind of makes discussing Chelsea and analysing Chelsea positively and negative a little bit irrelevant. If every time something goes wrong, everyone could just turn around and go Club World Cup fatigue, and we move on. I just personally just don't think that's intellectually interesting or honest, to be honest. Like, Chelsea knew they were going to be in the Club World Cup. We all celebrated the Club World Cup. That raised expectation, understandably. So yeah, I just want to lay out those things at the start of this review. We knew what Sunderland were going to provide. Sunderland do remind me that they do have the vibe of like a Sheffield United a few years ago under Chris Wilder. That team that comes up to the Premier League and might not be able to stay in the Premier League very long, but at least have one very impressive season where it's very difficult for other teams to counteract them. And in a Premier League that is swaying towards set pieces, physicality, becoming a lot more dominant and a lot more preferable, really, and the focus is on those, and those are really getting you several steps ahead of everyone else at the moment if you're really effective at attacking and defending them. I think Sunderland is kind of a perfect storm for them, really. But that shouldn't excuse Chelsea. Chelsea had absolute no clue how to deal with Sunderland pretty much after the equaliser. We started off really positively, but the moment that equaliser goes in, up until really they score right at the end, Chelsea looked pretty aimless, looked pretty clueless. I do want to pick up this stat from CFC Central that he noted, and I think it's very, very revealing. Since Enzo Maresca took over, there have been 7 Premier League Chelsea games where his side have kept 65% plus possession. They've won only 2 of those. We currently have 70%, and I think he tweeted that just before the second half. And for me, I think that says a lot about Chelsea's real struggle and real block at the moment, in terms of they cannot deal with teams that just surrender possession, sit quite deep, particularly in a back 5. You have to point out that is a persistent trend against a variety of opposition. A back 5, that was the first time that Reggie Labrie had played a back 5 this season. It's not something that Sunderland traditionally do. But it worked a treat against Chelsea. Just looking at some of the numbers, 68% possession in total for Chelsea by the end. XG though, 0.89 for Chelsea, 1.31 for Sunderland. And also you factor in where their equaliser came from, basically on the goal line for Isidore. And it was just, in some ways it's quite comical. Literally their first long throw, which we knew was going to be set pieces and long throws, we knew were going to be an issue. We knew they were going to be one of the key areas that Sunderland, like Brentford, like other teams, are going to try and capitalise on. And people can moan about it, and the stylistic, it maybe is not the most entertaining. But what do you expect teams like Sunderland to do and other teams when they come to the Bridge? It's about using the areas of their game and the areas of football that they are going to be able to match up with the opposition of a higher calibre. So you have to react to that as a superior team. You have to find strategies. We know that this is never going to change. Unlikely. Unless you're Southampton playing dumb football, the likelihood is we're going to have teams who come to the Bridge and always do this against us, because that is the way they are going to set up. It is then on the Chelsea head coach, whoever it is then on the superior team to find ways with higher caliber players to get around that. I'm not saying it's simple, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's your responsibility. And unfortunately under Enzo Maresca, as has also been the case under a variety of managers, for different reasons, for different level of squads and quality of players and options we have, it still remains the massive block for Chelsea and the obstacle for them to become a team that's going to challenge for the Premier League title. I think these games, Palace at home, Brentford away, Brighton at home, Brighton of course a different stylistic team, but also these kind of games are the ones for me Chelsea have to become clinical, ruthless. These are the most important games of the season, because I think although I know Chelsea will rise to the occasion or rise the level of performance in bigger games, I expect them to. Psychologically also, I look at these games and I just think Chelsea look complacent, they look sluggish. I think the concern for me is from an attacking point of view, how aimless we looked. I mean, how little we troubled Sunderland. With that amount of ball possession, it should not be as comfortable for a team to set up and defend in the way Sunderland did. I'm not taking away anything from Sunderland, who have been very impressive this season, but it seems quite easy for teams to set up in that block when they don't have an ambition or quality to really hurt Chelsea and are not going to open up the game, which is understandable. For us to just fall into this very slow, sluggish pass. And from a defensive point of view, this has been a consistent theme as well. Defensively, we are all over the place. We give away far too many great looks at our goal. The 2 goals yesterday were shocking to concede. The long throw, the inability to defend that long throw, and then it's literally a punt up the pitch at the end by Xhaka. And the defending, people point out the screenshots, right? I mean, Josh Achibon, whether he was injured or not, Tosin, his form at the moment is really concerning. Like, in terms of the longer he plays, in midweek I thought he was really poor, and the way we defended that was just comically bad. People have pointed out, as they like to all the time, Trevor Chalobah, but I kind of understand what Trevor was doing there, in the sense that I don't want to leave Tosin one-on-one. I think that's a sign really of the lack of trust with Tosin and his lack of ability when a team hits the ball over the top of us. I mean, if you think about a number of goals we've conceded this year where a ball gets played over the top of us, and it's a signal of how good Josh Achibon is at the moment, that a teenager, a Cobham, a breakthrough product, really is once again kind of one of our more trusted, reliable players. But from an attacking point of view, it gets back to frustrations I have about, it seems at times we have the handbrake on in games against teams for a lot of the time. I mean, Sunderland for a lot of the game yesterday, when they got possession back, were not looking to carve us open. They were looking most of the time to hit the ball as long as possible away from their own goal, reset, and get back into their shape. And it's at moments like that where I see a player like Reece James on the pitch. This is one of the things when Enzo Maresca was first appointed that I said, if I see Reece James in games of this nature, not bombing down the flank, not getting into crossing positions, not being a real menace and threat as a creative force for Chelsea, which we know he can be, I'm going to start to ask questions. I understand in certain scenarios you can't do that. But there are ways in which Chelsea yeah, it's difficult to break down a defense that is operating like this, but the lack of movement at times off the ball is really, really concerning for me. I think there is an argument that Garnacho being taken off actually wasn't a great thing for Chelsea at the time, because at least he was making moves. He scored the first goal. He seemed to be a lot more confident in this game. Neto, it was one of his poorest performances in a long period of time. Joao Pedro looked completely off it. Mark Gu barely got into the game. Caicedo, I actually think this was Caicedo's worst performance in a long period of time. I mean, I'm talking over a year at this point. On the ball, he gave the ball away cheaply a number of times. And Chelsea just all round, there was just such a lack of substance to the team. I think that was my major concern about this game, that from a tactical point of view, we seem to have no idea once Sunderland got into their shape and once they got back into the game of how we were going to break them down. The sluggish passing, I think it becomes quite just really tiresome when you see so many passes, cheap passes going between the centre-backs that are going absolutely nowhere, and our ability to identify how we're going to pose questions, extra questions to a defence sitting that deep. And I think on Enzo Maresca as a coach, tactically in bigger games, I think he has a better idea. But sometimes those games are a little bit easier because we don't have the ball handed to us. And you have to counteract those threats are maybe a little bit more obvious. So there is natural more space to run into. And Chelsea, of course, face a lot of these type of games where the space isn't there. But I don't think that's a great enough excuse. Enzo Maresca's aim, Chelsea's aim, this whole club's aim is getting back to the top of the Premier League. And I think we should be expecting a lot more. And that leads me to my, major concern. Our level of performance, even in games we're winning. I mean, watch the first half of that Forest game. Watch other periods of games where we've actually come back and won. Positive, right. But negatively, I am seeing a consistent trend of Chelsea just looking unprepared. They look woefully unprepared in so many games. They look like a team that hasn't even understood or been able to practice what is going to confront them on a Saturday at the Bridge or away from home. That's a major concern for me. And again, I think it's reasonable to look at the head coach, because we've seen Maresca construct really good and effective tactical plans for games, even alterations within games. There was no alterating in this game, and the alteration he made quite late on actually cost Chelsea the game, cost them at least a point. So there's that. Yeah, I want to say that, like, when we lose a game, there is a tendency, I'm not going to deny it, like of doomsday, proclamations, and we have to rip everything up and start again. However, I do want to state that it's a pretty simple equation for me. When Chelsea play well, Chelsea fans are happy, we praise the team. When Chelsea lose, they play badly, we criticise the team, and we're not that happy about it. For me, as I think I've always demonstrated on this show, that's the simple equation I work with. If the team shows me very little of positive signs in a game, I'm not going to sit here and lie to people about it. And I think that's just obvious, right? Like, I'm consistently baffled by people's inability to understand that dynamic that is everlasting, really, in football, across football supporters. Like, speak to football supporters in League 2, speak to them in League 1, speak to them in France, in Germany, across the world. You will get a similar vibe from a majority of supporters. That's just obvious. And I don't know how anyone can seriously counteract and argue against me when I say Chelsea's general level of performance this season in the Premier League has been poor. And maybe that's harsh, has been average. I mean, that I think is a fairer assessment. We have been bang average so far this year. And the metrics behind us in terms of the number of shots or the lack of shots we're taking, how many opportunities we are giving away to opposition, how easy it is to counteract what we do, especially if a team sets up in a really defensive structure. All these things for me are red flags about where Chelsea are going. They're not hit the panic button and rip everything up, but they are red flags about if our level of performance does not improve, Chelsea will not have a good season. They will not progress in the way we should be doing this year. So I think that's fair. I don't know how after, again, it's like, we can all sit here and lie to each other when things go wrong and try and claim that everything's perfect and rosy. I think Chelsea obviously have the quality within them to win a certain number of games. It's just at the moment, I think there's a thin margin for error between a game that Chelsea win and a game that Chelsea lose. I think there's far too much consistency in those two things. We could have easily lost at Forest last week. If their finishing was better, we could have easily lost that game. So I don't think I'm being unfair by that in that way. We're just quite lucky that their finishing was so poor and they were in a really bad place under Postecoglou. In other games, you aren't going to get as lucky. I could see Chelsea beating Spurs next week because, again, it's that type of game where you're facing a more maybe even under Thomas Frank, a more progressive team, a team that is going to, especially at home, and Spurs psychologically against Chelsea sometimes have a struggle. It's less about those games. It's more Wolves at home. It's Burnley away. It's the games that Chelsea have to become robotic at winning. And I am not seeing enough evidence. We have had a favourable start to this Premier League season. That is another thing as well. We have had a more favourable start to this Premier League season than last season and majority of our rivals. Arsenal have had to go away to Liverpool. They've had to go away to Newcastle. They faced Man City at home. You know, we have had a favourable run of fixtures and we have dropped a number of points, which then naturally, expectedly, puts pressure on us to win bigger games, which in fairness we seem to have a better ability of doing more recently. But it's those things that I think at this point of the season we have to take stock and go, okay, the season isn't done, it isn't over, it isn't, hit the panic button, but the level of performance and things we're seeing consistently, from coaching to individual players not performing, to structurally, to maybe the construction of the squad once again in certain areas simply not being good enough and not being to the level of where Chelsea require to be in the near future. I think all those are fair assessments. And I'm sorry, losing at home to Sunderland, I'm never going to sit here, especially a promoted Sunderland, I'm never going to sit here and tell you that's okay. Like, shrug shoulders, we move on. Like, no. Like, the performance level was so bad. And it simply needs to be a lot better if Chelsea desire to A, get Champions League football, and B, progress in the Premier League. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.